Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti, who goes by the original name Frances Abigail Olufunmilayo Thomas, was born on October 25, 1900 in Egbaland, Abeokuta, Nigeria, to a seamstress and a small planter, whose father had been an emancipated and baptized slave returnee from Sierra Leone. She was a feminist, Nigerian activist, and political leader who was the leading advocate of women's rights in our country during the first half of the 20th century. Her parents were Christians of Yoruba descent. Ransome-Kuti achieved goals that during her time, society kept out of women's reach. She was the first female student at the Abeokuta Grammar School, which she attended from 1914 to 1917. After teaching briefly at the school, she studied in England from 1919 to 1923, where she dropped her English name and shortened her Yoruba name to Funmilayo. She came back to Nigeria and resumed teaching at Abeokuta and married Israel Olodotu Ransome-Kuti, an Anglican clergyman and teacher, in 1925. When Ransome-Kuti returned to Abeokuta, she made a point of speaking Yoruba rather than English, even in her dealings with the colonial authorities. She emphasized the need for unity between the elite women and the vigorous market women of the town, for whom she organized night schooling through a ladies' club that she established. In 1944, the club expanded to include the market women, and in 1945, defended them when the government began taking their rights without compensations. Ransome-Kuti calls to the press caused the rights controls to be lifted. In 1932, when her husband became principal of the Abeokuta school, she helped organize the Abeokuta Ladies Club, initially a civic and charitable group of mostly Western-educated Christian women. The organization gradually became more political and feminist in its orientation, and in 1944, it formally admitted market women, who were generally impoverished, illiterate, and exploited by the colonial authorities. In 1946, the ALC changed its name to the Abeokuta Women's Union and opened its membership to all women in Abeokuta. The women also protested against the corruption of the traditional rulers and their failure to defend the women's demand or to challenge colonial authorities. One remarkable event organized by the Women's Union was the protest against the Alake, the king of the town, for enforcing food trade regulations that made life uncomfortable for the people. As with the Igbo women in 1929, the Egba women of Abeokuta focused their opposition on the local representation of British power rather than on British power itself. Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti became the first president of the AWU in 1946 and headed its successors' organization until her death. Under her leadership, the AWU became a national organization, renaming itself the Nigerian Women's Union in 1949 and the Federation of Nigerian Women's Society in 1953. Ransome-Kuti would eventually lead campaigns against the colonial government's exploitation of market women. Nigeria was colonized by Britain, and the colonial government had disrupted pre-existing economic and social settings, designing a new political economy that was alien to the society and more profitable to the British. This disruption included taxes, which at first only men paid because the colonial government considered women to be a measure of male wealth. The AWU initially campaigned against price controls, which drastically limited the income of market women, and for fair treatment of market women by the government. It also protested against a special tax on women imposed by the local ruler, Sir Ladapo Ademola II. From 1947, the organization led large demonstrations against Ademola's government, which led to his temporary abdication in 1949. The broader goals of the AWU included the greater educational opportunities for women and girls, the enforcement of sanitary regulations, and the provision of health care and other social services for women. Ransome-Kuti pursued initiatives with intentions of raising living standards for women and ultimately eliminating the causes of poverty. A mass demonstration took place on 29th and 30th of November 1947 and pulled in more than 10,000 women. The demonstration was repeated 10 days later. The Alake, in the meantime, employed divisive tactics by promising women positions of responsibilities, thus trying to undermine Ransome-Kuti's influence. In April 1948, Ransome-Kuti again refused to pay her taxes. This time, the whole community reacted. On 20th December, the men finally broke their silence. They organized a meeting in which they affirmed their desire to support the women in the name of happiness, freedom from oppression, and peace in the region. All then settled to wait for the government to give in. The Alake held out until 3rd January 1949, when the pressure became too much and he abdicated. The tax on women was abolished, whereas the one on men was increased. 4 women, including Ransome-Kuti, were named to be a new interim council. It had taken the women nearly 3 years of continuous struggle to win, during which they had remained cohesive, organized, and determined, and had not resorted to violence. Ransome-Kuti served several terms on the local council of Abeokuta between 1949 and 1960. In 1951, she ran unsuccessfully for a seat in the Regional Assembly as the candidate of the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroon, which she had helped found in 1944. In 1953, the FNWS became affiliated with the Women's International Democratic Federation, and Ransome-Kuti was elected the vice president of the organization. She subsequently lectured in several countries on the conditions of Nigerian women. After the NCNC rejected her bid for a second candidacy for the assembly in 1959, she ran as an independent, which split the NCNC vote and ensured the opposing party's victory. She was subsequently expelled from the NCNC and formed her own party, the Commoners People's Party, which was disbanded 1 year later. By this time, her political influence in Nigeria and her following among women in Abeokuta had declined significantly. After World War II, having been perceived to be prosperous as a result of a thriving, predominantly female indigo dye industry, not only did women in the Southwest pay taxes, the British government imposed a tax increase on them. Led by Ransome-Kuti, women in Abeokuta organized against the increase. In 1946, broadening its focus from only middle-class women to women from all walks of life, the Abeokuta Ladies Club became the Abeokuta Women's Union with a membership of around 20,000. Ransome-Kuti's achievements include membership in the Order of the Niger in 1965, an honorary doctorate in law from the University of Ibadan in 1968. Beyond Nigeria, Ransome-Kuti had links with women's organizations in Ghana, Algeria, and Egypt. In 1953, she was elected vice president of the Women's International Democratic Federation. She was also the first Nigerian representative at the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic and was also awarded Lenin Peace Prize in 1970, pointers to her leftist ideology's inclinations. In the early 1970s, she changed her surname to Anikulapo Kuti to further identify herself with the Yoruba culture, thereby following the example of her son Fela Anikulapo Kuti, a popular musician and a fierce critic of Nigeria's military government from the 1960s. In 1967, some 1,000 soldiers stormed the family property in Lagos, which Fela had transformed into a commune that he called the Kalakuta Republic. Ransome-Kuti had died in 1978 from injuries she had gotten from the previous year, when under a repressive military government, soldiers raided her family's home in Lagos and threw her out of the second-story window. Today, there is a tendency to downplay the historical contributions of African women, including Ransome-Kuti, whose achievements many have attempted to domesticate, as either a mother or an aunt. Ransome-Kuti's contribution to Nigeria's independence movement was, however, undeniable, and her legacy, as Quartz has reported, plays out across the continent.